Before 28 Days Later, there were plenty of movies which turned humans into monsters, but none did it quite like this movie. Here, the infected are not rotting corpses who shamble slowly toward their victims. These infected are fast, vicious, and loud. Even one could be formidable, let alone a horde of them. Alex Garland's screenplay captures it perfectly on page 4. Like a bullet from a gun, the infected chimp leaps out at the female activist and sinks its teeth into her neck. Like a bullet from a gun tells you everything about their rage-fueled movement, the ferocity, speed, and sound. The movie also has a real gritty feel. Portions were shot on small digital cameras. In part, it was a necessity. When you close main roads in London to make the city look abandoned, you can only hold traffic for minutes at a time, so the cameras had to be maneuverable. They had to be quick to start and stop, something more cumbersome with traditional film cameras. Camera choice was part artistic and part practical, but it all adds up to a certain feel, like we're watching a combination of home video and CCTV footage, rather than a movie, which goes a step further in tricking your mind into believing in the story. This movie even avoids opening credits or a title card. When 28 Days Later appears on screen, it's not as a title, but as a descriptor. That's how long after activists freed the rage-infected chimps that Jim wakes from his coma. And when the movie shows empty streets or atrocities, it borrows from true events to stay within the bounds of reality. Jim picking up money from empty streets is based on photographs of Cambodia after Pol Pot was driven out of Phnom Penh. Money was left in the streets because it was useless at that point. The board covered in notes and photos of missing people is taken from the aftermath of an earthquake in Beijing, where normal lines of communication were closed. The church filled with bodies is taken from atrocities in Rwanda, where a church could become the site of a mass killing and turned into a makeshift mortuary. Even the moment where Jim, Selena, and Mark survive the gas station explosion by hiding in the wall space between windows is based on a photograph from Northern Ireland. On the DVD commentary, director Danny Boyle describes seeing one where people escaped a bomb blast by doing exactly that. Garland and Boyle filled the movie with these images as an attempt to ground it in reality and to say something about rage. At the same time the movie feels real, it also feels surreal, as it would to suddenly wake up in the apocalypse. The plot device of Jim waking from a coma gives us a protagonist who shares our frame of reference. We discover this post-apocalyptic reality at the same pace he does, and it would feel surreal, like a violation of what you expect to wake up to every day. Some of that surrealism is achieved by stretching the truth. For example, London feels a lot more empty when it's completely devoid of people, living or dead. It's a stretch because in this scenario, of course the streets would be filled with bodies, but they made a choice to keep them empty. This clash of expectations is used throughout the movie to sustain that surreal feeling, like hearing Frosty the Snowman when they enter Frank and Hannah's apartment, seeing the entire city of Manchester in flames, or the upbeat music during their shopping spree, itself a surreal experience. How likely is it they'd find an untouched, unlooted store filled with everything they need in the midst of this apocalyptic wasteland? It's like a fantasy, and maybe it is. Because in the prior scene, it seems they've driven through a painting to find this store. Look at the flower bed they drive by on the way there, altered to look like they were drawn by Van Gogh. And there's the later dinner party scene. The soldiers are joined by a grieving, quiet Hannah along with Jim and Selena in the midst of a brutal journey. But the soldiers play at normalcy around the dinner table. It's inspired by a similar scene from Apocalypse Now, and Garland uses the word surreal twice to describe it in the screenplay. Interior mansion, dining room, night. A surreal scene. Dinner with full silver service, candles, wine in crystal glasses, napkins, and everyone rather formally sitting while Jones lays food on the table, wearing an apron over his uniform, made all the more surreal by Jim and Selina's grubby clothes and Hannah's dazed, tear-streaked face. It may seem counterintuitive to use the word surreal while talking about how grounded the movie feels, but sometimes reality feels different. If you've ever been in a bad accident or experienced some unexpected tragedy, it may have had a dreamlike or maybe nightmare-like quality to it. That phrase we've all thought, even if we didn't say it out loud. This can't be happening.
And then I wake up today in hospital. I wake up and I'm hallucinating or I'm...
But even if life has become a living nightmare, 28 Days Later never becomes gratuitous with its horror. It never devolves into unrelenting darkness or nihilism. Instead, it has a beating heart at the center of it, Selina rediscovering a sense of meaning, and maybe even love. 28 Days Later also takes its time to mourn everything that's been lost. Think of the scene where Jim finds his parents. A sad scene on its own, but even more haunting thanks to the hymn which plays over it, Abide With Me. Another hymn, Ave Maria, is used in a later scene, when they decide on leaving for the military blockade. Both punctuate dramatic scenes which explore two sides of the same theme: family. In one case losing it, Jim's parents, and in the other, celebrating the start of a new one, Jim and Selina joining Frank and Hannah. Using well-known, religiously oriented music from the 1800s adds gravity, makes the sequences appropriately haunting, and as Boyle describes on the commentary, it conjures thoughts of history and culture, both wiped out by the virus. But there is some hope. When the soldiers take Jim captive, one of them rants about quarantine. When he's taken to the execution grounds, Jim sees something in the sky that proves it. An airplane. The world hasn't ended. And after another 28 days pass, the infected begin to starve. Will Jim, Hannah, and Selina ever reach the uninfected, still thriving world? It's uncertain, but what is certain is that Jim, Selina, and Hannah have come together into a makeshift family. Selina thought survival was the greatest aim she could hope for, but meeting Frank and Hannah taught her otherwise.
I was thinking I was wrong.
But what?
All the death, all the shit. It doesn't really mean anything to Frank and Hannah because, well, she's got a dad and he's got his daughter, so... I was wrong when I said that staying alive is as good as it gets.
Now with Jim and Hannah, she is doing more than surviving, and she is making plans for a better future, even helping with a big hello sign for the next flyover. This movie's grungy feel, the ferocity of the infected, and the emotional core at the center of it make it stand out among so many apocalyptic tales. But the idea which drew Danny Boyle to Alex Garland's screenplay was rage. From Garland speaking with Filmmaker magazine, Danny was particularly interested in issues that had to do with social rage, the increase of rage in our society, road rage, and other things. There are exactly 0 zombies in 28 Days Later, but in its basic premise is something similar to zombie movies, large populations turned into hordes of monsters. And like the Night, Dawn, and Day of the Dead films which Garland cites as influences on this movie, the zombies or monsters are meant to represent us, or at least some aspect of us, like our rampant consumerism in Dawn of the Dead, where even reanimated corpses are drawn to the shopping mall. But in 28 Days Later, the connection is more than metaphorical. It's part of the story. In the same Filmmaker magazine interview, Boyle referred to the infection as a psychological virus. This differentiates it from the zombie genre, where people become something unnatural, monsters who feed on living flesh. This insatiable and bizarre appetite is something new that replaces human nature. But in 28 Days Later, nothing new is added to human nature. Instead, people become more of something they already are. Everyone has rage inside them. This infection simply amplifies it. and turns off everything else. But Garland specifically referred to social rage, like it's more than just an emotion, but something that boils up as a societal phenomenon. And the movie primes you to think of this because it opens with footage of what happens when rage boils over. The footage is inspired by real footage of the Sierra Leone Civil War, taken by Soria Samara, a brave journalist who put himself in the middle of war to capture raw footage and show the world what's really happening, most notably in the documentary Cry Freetown. Boyle mentions they debated using actual footage, but ultimately decided it would be better to mock something up rather than depict real violence. The clips that open the movie are fast and chaotic. It's hard to pin down exactly what you're seeing, but it clearly alludes to social unrest, violence, and death. But it does not appear to be targeted in a calculated way, but instead driven by frenzied emotion. The Sierra Leone Civil War was filled with some of the worst, inhumane atrocities you can imagine. They are indescribably disturbing, and I won't describe them here, other than to say a rational person can find legitimate grievances which sparked that war, but it ultimately led to monstrous actions, where no adjectives exist to adequately describe their awfulness. It's similar to what I discussed in my video on Castlevania Nocturne concerning the French Revolution. There may have been just cause for revolution, but clearly there were many who fought, not only for a higher cause, but also to indulge in their rage. Little else can explain the wanton disemboweling and slaughter. This is the specific kind of rage those opening images conjure. When hate, no matter how justified, boils over, it can turn into a social rage, which becomes an incredible force of violence. These opening clips don't just allude to these ideas, they essentially are the infection. We see these clips are being screened for a chimp strapped to a chair, and the scientist says he's been infected with rage. In a literal sense, the scientists have taken our social rage captured in footage and stuck it into these apes. Why? The scientist says, in order to cure, you must first understand. And the screenplay makes it even more explicit, adding the lines, just imagine, to have power over all the things we feel we can't control, anger, violence. It seems their goal is to cure a population of rage, which itself is a frightening proposition. There are plenty of times in history where perhaps revolution was a just cause, and it's hard to imagine it succeeding without some strong emotions. Pamphlets, essays, and logical arguments might lay the groundwork, but without rallying cries like, "Give me liberty" or "Give me death." It's hard to imagine sparks turning into the raging inferno needed for revolution, and if the government finds its cure for rage, those sparks will amount to nothing. Instead, emotions will be tempered and populations pacified. So it seems rage has some utility. On the other hand, too much leads to unnecessary death and destruction. Just look at examples throughout history, some of which have been captured on film and poured into these chimps. And as the infection spreads, we see what pure rage does to a society. There are many ways civil unrest comes about, but one that's often to blame is the failings and injustices of those in power. 28 Days Later is in part, of course, about the fear of highly deadly, highly contagious disease. At the time this movie was made, there were a couple of major cases fresh in mind. An outbreak of foot and mouth disease in the UK saw over 6 million cows and sheep killed in order to stop it. And although it never spread to people, some do, like the Nipah virus in '98. 1 million pigs were killed to stop the outbreak, but not before 108 people were killed by it. But 28 Days Later goes a step further to zero in on a particular kind of virus, one that is engineered. It's a cautionary tale to apply science responsibly, and it touches on a distrust toward those in power. Not only might the scientists, government, and military woefully fail to protect us against an outbreak, but they might be responsible for it in the first place. They may tout their goals as noble. To cure rage, they must first understand it. Even if true, it's a risk they've taken on society's behalf without permission, and it reeks of self-preservation, a way for those in power to hold on to power by protecting us from ourselves, by ensuring we never get too upset and never find the energy needed to take their power away. This movie really was ahead of its time in some ways. Kind of feels like a good time for a sequel. Oh, cool. Wait a minute. Zombie films? What zombies? The distrust of those we expect to protect us starts in the opening frames, when we learn about the rage virus they created. It's animal activists who inadvertently let it loose, but the risk only exists thanks to the scientists and those who fund their operation. The distrust continues to grow when Jim wakes up to discover they've let the country fall. It nearly reaches a fever pitch when they find the soldiers acting more like overgrown children. As they tour the outpost, the feeling of safety it offers quickly turns into dread. And then, of course, we discover the military outpost's sinister nature. Commanding Officer Henry West plans on forcing Selena and Hannah to satisfy his men, ostensibly with the goal of repopulation, but it feels more like trying to pacify a pack of wild animals, and Jim will be executed for attempting to interfere. Finally, we uncover another failing. The airplane in the sky tells Jim the rest of the world is okay, but has not found a way to help or even communicate, leaving Great Britain quarantined. 28 days later encourages a skepticism of science pushing research too far or in the wrong direction, governments failing to properly address an emergency, and a military that quickly turns on the people it's supposed to protect. All of that adds up to civil unrest, which, unfettered, turns into rage. In 28 days later, that rage is spread involuntarily through saliva and blood. But even without infection, we don't need to be forced into rage, because the emotion itself is intoxicating. When you feel angry, there's a gravity to that emotion, which makes it almost impossible to escape from. If you're in an argument, you want to disprove your opponent, and the idea of backing down is insane. If you believe you were wronged, you want to see justice done. And when anger turns to rage, you will. Jim woke up alone in a world filled with monsters. Yet somehow he managed to cobble a family together. Then, on the radio, they found hope, a message about the answer to infection. They followed its directions, and it wasn't easy, but they made it. Hannah lost her father, but they made it. And that hope suddenly turned sour. But when they drag Jim to those execution grounds, he shows them what rage really looks like. He shows them how a bicycle courier can take on a platoon of trained soldiers. He sounds the alarm to bring the infected into their compound. He lets the soldiers die. He kills some himself, one with his bare hands. And by the time he turns to Selena, he looks no different than the infected, because he is using the same weapon, rage. The 28 Days Later theme, titled In the House in a Heartbeat, plays over this sequence and perfectly captures what it's all about. I can't play it for you here, but it's easy to find on YouTube, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen to music, so give it a listen if you need a reminder. But it starts with an ominous piano, as though warning you that something is coming. A warning because rage can be a terrifying force. As Jim kills his way through the compound, getting covered in blood, looking more and more like the infected, you can feel the rage grow as the piano is overshadowed by other instruments, reaching its peak as Jim digs his thumbs into a man's skull. He turns to Selena and the music is silent. Then it returns quietly, but now it's melancholy and almost romantic. Because unlike the infected, and unlike the social rage that's allowed to boil over into unending violence and atrocities, Jim can't come back from it. When the song reaches its crescendo, it's satisfying, like winning an argument or enacting justice. It feels good. When there is a cause that tugs at our most primal feelings of morality and justice, the rage is intoxicating, but you have to be able to come back from it. How? Maybe it helps to have something like the opposite of rage. Instead of the intense desire to see something destroyed, the intense desire to hold on to something and protect it. Love. The thing Selena discovered when she realized Hannah and Frank were okay because they had each other. Familial love. And with Jim, maybe she can have a romantic love. To survive this world, she had to become a monster.
Look, if someone gets infected, you've got between 10 and 20 seconds to kill them. It might be your brother or your sister or your oldest friend. It makes no difference. And just so you know where you stand, if it happens to you, I'll do it in a heartbeat.
But after discovering there is more than just survival, she breaks that rule. When Jim comes to her after killing the soldiers, she hesitates.
That was longer than a heartbeat.
And she brings Jim back too. It's easy to imagine a world where he doesn't have Selena or Hannah and is forced to kill for survival, and it's easy to imagine how that could turn him into a monster, like some of those soldiers. If you listen to Selena earlier in the movie, ready to kill a brother, sister, or oldest friend, she isn't wrong. If someone is 15 seconds away from turning into a creature who will kill you, of course it's necessary to stop them, just as Major Henry West isn't entirely wrong when he gives a speech about people killing people, how that's what he's seen in the 4 weeks since infection, and it's no different from what he saw the 4 weeks before infection, and the 4 weeks before that.
That as far back as I care to remember, people killing people, which to my mind puts us in a state of normality right now.
But both their stories are incomplete, and that's what it means to be cynical. It's a worldview corroborated by so much evidence, but only if you ignore the rest. Because the truth is that yes, there is rage, but there is also love. 28 Days Later is thrilling, dark, sad, and at the same time, strangely hopeful. That last part is not something you often see done well in horror, and it's part of what's made this one of my favorite movies. Then there was 28 Weeks Later. It definitely didn't feel as fresh as the original and didn't leave quite the same impact, but it is thrilling, it does try some new things, and it does open a couple of fresh avenues to re-explore power, of course rage, and some other ideas. Before going into all that, in case it's been a couple decades for you too, I'll recap the movie. As the rage virus overtakes mainland Britain, married couple Don and Alice Harris survive with a few others in a small cottage. Their son and daughter were on a school trip abroad when the outbreak hit, so they aren't here, but they are safe. One night, cottage life comes to an end, starting with a bang at the door. A little boy needs help. Alice is the one who insists on letting him in, and he shows no signs of infection. But the same cannot be said for the ones chasing him, and soon the horde is upon them. In the chaos of the attack, Don and Alice have to make a choice: leave with their lives or try to save the boy. Alice chooses the latter. She runs for him, just as the infected break into the room, and now Don has a choice: help or run. He gets outside and looks up to see his wife in the window calling for help, just before she's attacked. He keeps running. The infected close in as he reaches a boat and survives the day at the cost of abandoning the mother of his children. 28 weeks later, he reunites with those children. By now, the infected have died from starvation, and a US-led NATO force has begun reconstruction and repatriation, starting with an area they've designated District 1. That's where Tammy and Andy find their father, Don. He tells them what happened to their mother, at least a version of it. In this telling, he had no choice. He saw them biting her. In fact, he tried to go back, but she was already gone. There was nothing he could do. It's a lie he could never expect them to uncover, but the next day, they do. Tammy and Andy sneak out of the quarantine zone to go back home and retrieve some things, including a photo of their mother. But what they find is their mother, alive. She's been surviving alone all this time. Outside, they find military personnel waiting for them because, of course, they were spotted upon leaving. And back in District 1, Scarlett, the chief medical officer, makes the most shocking discovery of all. The hemorrhaging in Alice's left eye is part of the story. Then there's the bite on her arm. Scarlett leaves Alice restrained and quarantined as she confirms the results back in her lab. Alice was bit, but did not succumb. She must have some kind of natural immunity, though she warns General Stone. Alice is a carrier and could still infect others. Of course, Don has no idea, and using his access as caretaker of the facility, he visits his wife. He tells her that he's sorry. He was scared. He begs her forgiveness, and she gives it to him. She tells Don that she loves him. They kiss. Her infected saliva works fast. Within a couple of minutes, all that's left of Dawn is rage. Strapped to the table, there is no escape for Alice as her husband tears her to pieces. Then he moves on to any nearby soldiers, and the facility quickly falls into chaos. Civilians are shoved into an enclosed area as Stone tries to contain the rapidly spreading infection. Scarlett gets Tammy to safety, but Andy is lost in the crowd. And when Dawn finds the crowd, their panic turns to rage. One by one, they are killed or turned. Andy only manages to escape when he finds a vent. Outside, he joins others running for safety. Snipers on rooftops aim for the infected until it becomes impossible to differentiate them, and General Stone gives the order: kill them all, infected or not. Andy ends up in Doyle's crosshairs, a sniper who cannot bring himself to shoot a child. Instead, he abandons his post and heads below to help any survivors escape. Andy finds Tammy and Scarlett in a warehouse, where Doyle soon joins them too. He leads them and another survivor, Sam, out of the city, something which becomes more urgent when his friend Flynn sends a warning. They're about to firebomb the entire city. They escape just as District 1 goes up in flames, a sacrifice of lives that could save many others, except some infected manage to escape. The survivors reach an abandoned park where they have a moment to catch their breaths. That's when Scarlett tells Doyle why she abandoned her post. Those kids might have inherited their mother's immunity. They could be the key to a cure or vaccine, so she has to keep them safe. Then Flynn calls with another warning. The infected are close, and on cue, they see the horde coming over the hill. Flynn arrives by helicopter and offers to take Doyle back, but he cannot accept the civilians. In desperation, Sam leaps onto the helicopter, so Flynn takes him for a ride through the horde. Plenty of the infected die by helicopter blade before Sam falls from the copter to his death. Flynn leaves on his own, telling Doyle to reach the stadium for extraction, leave the civilians behind. Doyle, meanwhile, escapes on foot with Scarlett, Tammy, and Andy until they run into soldiers clearing the city. They find a car that won't start. Doyle volunteers to get out and push it. A sacrifice, because that puts him right in the soldiers' crosshairs, who are armed with flamethrowers. Doyle gets the car moving just before the children watch him burn. Scarlett takes them underground, where, in the darkness, the infected Don finds them. He beats Scarlett to death with the gun she borrowed from Doyle. Next, he finds Andy, and manages to get in one bite before Tammy shoots her father dead. Andy runs to be alone, and protect his sister from the infection he knows is coming, but she will stay with him, no matter what. She looks into his eyes as the infection takes hold, but then, nothing. Just like his mother, Andy is immune. They head to the stadium where they find Flynn and tell him that Doyle didn't make it. This time, Flynn lets them onto the helicopter and brings them to safety. 28 days later, Flynn's abandoned helicopter sits in France. Over the radio, someone can be heard calling for help because the infection has now spread to the mainland of Europe as rage-fueled monsters run toward the Eiffel Tower. In the end, Tammy and Andy's fates are ambiguous, but what's not ambiguous is that the infection has spread, possibly thanks to Andy as a carrier. Rewatching the movie, my impression of it hasn't changed all that much. It emulates 28 Days Later's naturalistic style, often using handheld cameras, but the plot itself often undercuts its realism with conveniences and coincidences. Where Days had a grungy feel that made it grounded, Weeks feels a lot more like a typical movie. In the original, when Jim went back home, there was no chance he'd discover a living parent and learn he's the key to a cure. It happens to Andy and Tammy, who are not just a couple of children in District 1, but the only children who have been allowed in. It's a coincidence on top of a coincidence. And when they sneak out of the quarantine zone, they are immediately spotted, but given incredible leeway to explore the surroundings before they're brought in. Once Scarlett sees the hemorrhaging in Alice's eye and the bite on her arm, it's also incredible that she leaves her so carelessly unguarded. And good thing Don is the section officer of the facility, so he has unlimited access he needs to see his unguarded wife. We never actually see him doing his job, so it doesn't feel like a character detail, but a contrivance. A way to reverse engineer this moment. How does Don get to his wife in the secured facility? He has an all-access pass. Why? Let's say he's the caretaker. This movie doesn't achieve the same, almost documentary feel of the first one, but it does make some stylistic choices that sometimes work really well. Years after seeing it, the one moment that always stuck in my mind is Don running from the horde at the end of the opening sequence. Specifically this part, where the camera kind of spins around him while he runs, but keeps him at the edge of the frame so you can't see what he's running from. Then it reveals. The infected are behind him, and they're coming over the hill from the side too. Before that, when they're all cooped up in the cottage, I also love how dark it is with all the windows boarded up. You don't realize it's daytime until they rip the door open to let the child in, and sunlight suddenly beams into the room. It makes you feel just how isolated they've been from the outside. Contrast is always a great tool for storytelling because we get used to anything that's static. Another great example of this is when Don sits down to tell his children what happened to their mother. We switch from handheld to a static camera. We include a shot different from any other that came before, from directly above them, showing the distance between the father and his children, showing them together and him alone. The contrast, moving from a dynamic camera to a still one, grabs your attention and emulates what the characters are feeling. Everything has stopped for this one important moment. What happens next will determine the course of their relationship as a family. I wish the movie had more of this, because it gets to another aspect Weeks is missing that made Days so special. Moving character arcs. Jim falling in love with Selena. Selena rediscovering purpose and meaning after becoming cold-hearted and cynical. Hannah grieving her father while forming a new family with Jim and Selena. And Frank trying to protect his daughter even in his final moments as infection takes hold. Each character had a journey, which infused the movie with emotion and meaning, putting heart at the center of a very dark story, something that is hard to achieve in the horror genre while still feeling grounded. 28 Weeks Later also had compelling character dynamics, but only for a portion of the movie. Don is an interesting protagonist who made a difficult choice in the opening sequence, which risks alienating him from the audience, so it's a bold choice. And it enabled the heart-wrenching scene I mentioned above. When we find out that Alice is still alive, the twist might feel too movie-like, but it could make for compelling drama. Can Don really face her with all his guilt? Can she still love him after feeling abandoned? We don't explore either question because minutes after their reunion, he is infected and she is dead. It certainly makes for an unexpected twist, but when you remove the most compelling characters at the 40-minute mark, it's important to have someone else for us to focus on. But Scarlett and Doyle are hardly characters. Andy and Tammy are obviously going through something difficult, but the rest of the movie is pure thriller. It's one long chase sequence, so there isn't a second for them to breathe. And there aren't any choices for them to make. It's just run, run, run for your lives. There are suspenseful moments and visually striking ones, but character is mostly absent. What about its themes? To the extent the movie works, and sometimes it does, what is it trying to say that's different from 28 Days Later? Often, a movie emphasizes its theme by establishing it in the opening sequence. Here, the first thing we see is a character who has the opportunity to make a sacrifice, but chooses not to. Don could try to help his wife and the boy, but instead, he runs. The theme of sacrifice recurs because opposite Don are Scarlett and Doyle, both of whom do sacrifice their lives for the safety of Don's own children. The movie seems to judge Don harshly for this choice, because while Scarlett and Doyle die heroes, Don becomes infected, kills his own wife, and tries to kill his own son before getting shot dead by his daughter. The sniper and medical officer, on the other hand, die as heroes, while he dies hated by his own children. Is he a bad man? Is he a coward? Would it have been the right choice for him to go back for Alice? In actuality, there's a high likelihood he would have been bitten alongside her, except she would have survived thanks to her immunity, while he would have succumbed. It's also not explicit how Alice survived. The bite did not turn her, but she was surrounded by the infected. Did Don running distract them and draw them away? Did he unknowingly save her after all? All of this is secondary to the emotional truth. He abandoned his wife and a child while she cried out for help in the face of likely imminent death. It was a choice he made out of fear. Maybe in a life or death crisis moment, it's hard not to be ruled by fear. And maybe we can't judge Don too harshly. Except that 28 weeks later, he continues to be ruled by fear. When he reunites with his children in District 1, he doesn't just shade the truth. He lies. He tells them that he saw her getting bit, that he tried to go back, but she was already gone, implying that he saw her dead or infected. And when Andy asks, Don emphasizes there was nothing he could do. Maybe we can't judge him too harshly, but he has certainly judged himself, because this false confession is the work of a guilty mind. If there's a cautionary tale in 28 Weeks Later, I think it's less about knowing exactly what to do in a life or death scenario, and more about facing the truth, processing traumatic experiences rather than hiding from them or lying to yourself. A similar lesson Dom learned 3 years after this movie in Inception, which I only mention because I recently covered it, and isn't that a weird coincidence? Don and Dom, not to mention DiCaprio was originally in the running to play Don in 28 Weeks Later. Okay, that's not true. Had Don processed his traumatic experience and understood the choice he made, rather than let the guilt fester, he might have lived. He might have been able to think a little more clearly when he saw Alice. He might have not been so desperate to clear his conscience. So maybe he would have noticed the hemorrhaging in her eye or bite on her arm. It's hard to imagine not seeing the person you love who is miraculously alive, but it is possible to imagine exercising enough patience to keep a slight distance, especially when deadly illness is involved, and especially when that illness could be deadly for you and the one you love. Once Don turns, he gouges out Alice's eyes. It echoes Jim's attack in 28 Days Later, but further, on the DVD commentary, the writer and director discuss how it's meant to evoke Don's guilt. It's grown into a sort of resentment. The memory of Alice has become a source of suffering for him, and he can't bring himself to look her in the eyes. Once his rage is unleashed, it turns to its source and destroys it. That's how powerful guilt can be. It can turn into resentment. And in 28 weeks later, it can be the spark that reignites the world. If not for Don, perhaps Alice would have remained safely in quarantine. Maybe the infection would not have come back. Or maybe by the time it did, they would have developed vaccines and cures with the help of Alice's blood. Instead, especially considering the ending, the world now faces the very real possibility of an apocalypse. In some ways, I think fear and rage are on opposite ends of a spectrum. One paralyzes you, while the other drives you uncontrollably. One causes Don to abandon his family, and the other makes Jim kill everyone between him and his makeshift family. Though I don't think rage is as much of a theme in 28 Weeks Later. In fact, the word is never spoken in the movie. It's only said once in 28 Days Later, but in an important moment. The activist asks the scientist what the chimps are infected with. He doesn't answer right away. At first, he only stammers. In order to cure, you must first understand. The activist asks again, infected with what? Now your ears are perked up when the scientist finally answers. Rage. And that's after the opening sequence of civil unrest. It frames the movie through the lens of societal rage, versus 28 Weeks Later that focuses more on sacrifice. And the two movies offer them as different answers to a similar problem. Societal rage is the kind of thing that can boil up thanks to an oppressive government. It's what moves citizens to often violent, revolution. And 28 Days Later, that idea is conjured in the opening clips and returns with the soldiers who use their power in awful ways, driving Jim into his rageful revolt. The moment when Selena sees Jim and mistakes him for the infected is so powerful, and the perfect line acknowledging their love in an organic, memorable way, while also acknowledging Selena's transformation as a character. That was longer than a heartbeat. But in answer to the original, this sequel turns the civilian into less of a hero, and in the latter half focuses on a couple members of the military, Scarlett and Doyle. They both risked everything by abandoning their posts and ultimately did sacrifice their lives to save the children. Toppling an oppressive regime does not have to happen solely from the citizens rising up, but also from within. A government or ruling power may act like a monolithic force, but it is composed of people, some of whom may turn when it goes too far. The rest hold on to their power and fear losing it, a fear which drives them to desperate acts, like firebombing their own citizens, or flying a helicopter through a horde of infected and refusing to save children, reserving a seat only for your fellow soldier. 28 Days Later, of course, highlighted fear of a deadly virus, how not only might governments fail to stop it, but might even be responsible for it to begin with. This movie continues that theme, focusing less on the origins of the virus, more on our inability to contain it. It's almost laughable how quickly things spiral out of control once Don gets infected. And of course, not only are they unable to contain it, but just like the soldiers in Days, they quickly turn on civilians. Less out of desperation and animalistic urges, more out of, again, fear. And in the end, they only made things worse, because now the virus is in France, where 28 Days Later led us to believe we're in the apocalypse, only to show Britain is quarantined. Weeks ending makes that apocalypse a lot more conceivable, especially with the introduction of immune carriers who can still spread it. I think we can wrap it up there. Ultimately, 28 Weeks Later is a mixed bag of a movie that pales in comparison to the original. It does try a few new things, and I appreciate that, but now that I've seen it again, I doubt I'll be revisiting it much in the future. I'll be reserving any rewatching for 28 Days Later. Now, let's talk about 28 Years Later. Sequels to long-dormant franchises are all the rage, kinda like a virus. So what better time for the rage virus to make its return? 28 years ago, don't check my math, 28 Days Later reinvigorated the shambling corpse of the zombie genre with two simple tricks. What if they weren't slow, And what if they weren't zombies? Though one guy does use that word in 28 Years Later, and just look at the popcorn meter, clearly pissed a lot of people off. I assume that's why the low score, because otherwise, I feel like I saw a totally different movie from these people. And I lied. Days used a third trick too, being a great movie, the kind that makes you want to use the word film. It also had a sequel. Moving on. That's Not Fair. 28 Weeks Later wasn't awful, but also didn't hold a candle to the original, and it hardly stood a chance with Boyle and Garland's limited involvement. But now, they're back with Years, and another sequel that's already been shot, plus another they're hoping to make. I loved 28 Years Later. It drops us into a world almost 3 decades into a quarantined apocalypse. Unlike Days, where Jim is just as lost as the audience, this movie offers no one to hold our hand. Instead, we discover the new world on our own. It's a surreal feeling, watching a kid wake up and prepare for a coming-of-age adventure as if it's the most natural thing, to live on an island across from a mainland teeming with monsters. I love how much tension there is once they reach the mainland, and how the movie is almost episodic in structure. It reflects the way coming-of-age experiences aren't typically singular, and don't hinge on one person. Instead, Years gives us the dad episode, the mom episode, and the Dr. Kelson or competing father figure episode. It's not a new theme for these movies. Jim's first move in 28 Days Later is to look for his parents. Then they meet Frank and Hannah, Frank who becomes a sort of father figure for Jim.
You're having a bad dream, that's all.
Thanks, Dad.
And like 28 Years Later, there are a couple of episodes. The Frank episode, and then a new father figure in the Major Henry West episode.
But don't worry. You're quite safe here.
Years also takes a surprisingly somber and meditative turn toward the end, especially effective because it brings the thriller to a halt. You feel the shift, the same way you feel a car decelerate. You've trudged through death-filled horrors. Now Dr. Kelson will help you reflect on the journey and your relationship with death. It's the opposite trajectory you expect from a horror or thriller, which typically accelerate in the final act. That would be disappointing if that final stretch weren't so effective and moving, but it is both of those things. So the surprising turn is instead a welcome change of pace. But the ending is weird. So what? Weird is good. Weird is different. It's exciting, especially in the hands of capable filmmakers who already have a sequel ready to go. Anyway, let's not get ahead of ourselves and instead start at the beginning. Spoilers ahead for 28 Years Later. 28 years ago, the rage virus laid waste to the UK. Many died, but a few survived, including a young boy named Jimmy. He was watching Teletubbies with a bunch of other kids before the infected showed up. They all die. Jimmy's mom dies. He runs outside to the church where he finds his dad ranting about the day of judgment. He gives Jimmy the cross from around his neck before the boy hides and his father allows himself to be overtaken by the rage-fueled monsters. His salvation. Jimmy runs, fade to black, except for the cross for a moment, then some on-screen text which canonizes, then explains away the ending of 28 Weeks Later. The rage virus laid waste to the UK. It was driven back from continental Europe. That's the key right there. Remember the end of Weeks where the virus arrived in Paris? Nope, it was driven back. The British mainland was quarantined to contain the virus. Survivors were left to fend for themselves. This opening almost works as its own little short film, a thriller about a kid surviving a rage attack, with dramatic underpinnings, a father who forsakes his son. It sets the thematic lens for this movie, prepare for children to be disappointed by their parents. 28 years later, we meet some of those survivors and find out what nearly 30 years of apocalyptic living does to a society. They live in a fortified community where resources are scarce and everyone has their role. Later on in the classroom, we see a list of those roles: hunter, farmer, forager, and so on. For the 12-year-old Spike, his role will be hunter, and today his father Jamie will take him to the mainland for his first kill. It's a brilliant setup for the movie. They live on an island connected to the mainland by a tidal causeway, essentially a walkable path. Walkable when in low tide. Otherwise, it's submerged in water and you're stuck on whichever side you're on. It makes for a striking image and soon an amazingly tense sequence. While they head out, Spike's mother Isla will be in the same place she usually is, bed. She's been sick. No one is quite sure what's wrong, but she suffers awful headaches. She's forgetful and often gets confused. Spike is already learning a few lessons from his parents. They won't always be there for you. His mom is still alive but unable to function entirely as a mother, and he gets his first clue that his father is putting on a brave face. When he has to go upstairs to take care of his wife, Spike catches his reflection, stopping with frustration and hesitation before heading up to help her. I mentioned it in the intro, but they do an excellent job immersing you in this new world, which borrows so many elements from the old world, the one even older than ours, like the small set of well-defined jobs and roles in the village. You also have to love the original score by the Young Fathers. It almost makes up for the fact that the 28 Days Later theme, In the House in a Heartbeat by John Murphy, does not return in this film. After seeing how people have changed these last 28 years, now on the mainland, we see how the virus has changed. There are plenty of infected that are just like you remember from Days and Weeks. We call those the fast ones, but in addition, two new forms. Alphas, a stronger, smarter, and more aggressive strain who lead hunting packs, rip off heads and spinal cords with their bare hands, Predator style, and Slow-Lows, big, slug-like infected who crawl around eating worms and beetles off the ground. What explains this change? The virus leads to a quite agitated state, which expends a lot of energy. For some, that means ending up on the ground, conserving energy by crawling around and eating whatever they find in the dirt. For others, the opposite. The virus acts like a steroid, dealing with that energy expenditure by building a body capable of wielding it. That in turn enables the traditional fast infected to survive. They seem to be starving out at the end of days, but with the emergence of alphas, they're led in hunting packs and able to feed off animals. As James and Spike make their way to the mainland, the moment that gave me goosebumps and propelled this movie to the ranks of one of my all-time favorites. We hear a reading of the poem Boots by Rudyard Kipling. The poem was first published in 1903 and was meant to capture a British soldier's perspective during the Second Boer War in South Africa. It's meant to capture how war becomes monotonous, exhausting, and dehumanizing. The repetition of the word boots in a repetitive cadence mimics the sound of marching. Soldiers are reduced from individuals into something mechanical, going through a routine, becoming numb to the task before them. The movie uses a reading of the poem recorded in 1915, performed by actor Taylor Holmes. As he reads, his voice turns manic, as though being driven mad by the repetition. On its own, the reading takes you on a journey. You're drained by the end of it. In the context of 28 years later, it does so much. Spike is starting a dangerous journey. He's nervous. Sometimes a movie emphasizes nerves with the sound of a heartbeat. Boots does the same with pulsing repetition, and those nerves are exacerbated by Holmes' manic reading. The movie even cuts to images of the rage infected in the dark, allowing us to see them with a red night vision. This preview of the monsters awaiting Spike is one more anxiety-inducing ingredient. And there's more to unpack. Boots itself is an echo from the past, but in addition, the sequence is intercut with footage from 1944's Henry V, showing medieval war, along with archival footage of British soldiers marching in World War II. What is the movie telling us? Spike is going on a journey that isn't new. Countless soldiers have done the same throughout human and British history. The only difference is that today the enemy are rage-infected people rather than foreign nations. In interviews discussing their thinking behind 28 Years Later and its underlying themes, Boyle and Garland have also talked about the idea of society looking backwards. That seems to be the main idea that drew them into this story. In their interview with Evolution of Horror, Garland talks about how they're exploring the regressive state over the last 10 to 15 years, where there's a real preoccupation related to looking backwards.
how things used to be, trying to make things great again or recover a state of glorious sovereignty or whatever it happens to be.
He described this attitude as looking backwards to recapture something, and he asks, what are the features of that?
And I think the features tend to be cherry-picked memories and amnesia about some things. But crucially, and I think this becomes the most important factor, is misremembering things.
He goes on to tie this attitude directly to the Jamie character.
If you look at the way, say, the father of the little boy reacts to infected, they're sort of, and he talks about how it's okay to kill them, and in fact it's good to kill them, and you need to learn how to do it, and don't worry about killing them because they don't have souls, which is like saying they are subhuman in a sense.
And finally, Danny Boyle brings it back to Henry V when he describes how the community in this movie lives.
They're static, and their sense of richness comes from looking back, and they connect with Henry V, with Agincourt. We beat the French there, we were outnumbered. You can imagine them telling the stories. Way outnumbered, but we few, we band of brothers. We stuck together like we did after the...
Jamie's gung-ho attitude about killing, turning his son into a soldier against the rage-infected horde, it all ties into this idea, glorifying violence against the enemy. Speaking of cherry-picked, in this montage of brave men going to war, the movie includes a shot from 28 Weeks Later, with soldiers firing on the infected. What's hard to tell from this cherry-picked image is that they're also firing on uninfected civilians. And 28 weeks later, when the infection returns, they stop differentiating and just start shooting everyone. I love how this is cut in a way where it almost looks like the knights with bows and arrows are the ones firing on the civilians in 28 weeks later. It's visual poetry that draws a line from the distant past all the way through to the present. The weapons, technology, and enemies may change, but the ideas remain. The movie is obviously critical of Jamie's bloodthirst for the infected, something that becomes clearer toward the end of the movie, but it also recognizes the utility in it. Embracing the hunt has forged Jamie and others into warriors capable of defending their community and surviving. It's similar to 28 Days Later, which also looks at two sides of the same coin. It highlights the dangers of societal rage, while also recognizing the utility of rage. Jim embraces rage to kill anyone between him and his new family. That's how he rescues Selena and Hannah. We'll say more about this later. Not far off the causeway, Spike gets his first kill, a slow-lo. They're surprised by a second one, which Jamie takes care of. Then they see something strange, another slow-lo, but this one is a child. Jamie lets that one live, and it scampers off. One of the worst things a sequel can do is just show you more of the same. So how do you make the rage-infected, who we met 28 years ago, frightening again? On the one hand, you introduce the alphas, a more dangerous breed, scary in their strength and intelligence. On the other hand, the first rage-infected we meet in the movie are slow-los, which are grotesque in a way we haven't seen before. They are, to put it bluntly, disgusting, like slugs, which is what Garland called them in the original screenplay before they were changed to slow-los. Also, seeing one as a child is off-putting and raises uncomfortable questions. Where the hell did it come from? Are these things breeding now? Spoilers, yes. There's a strange moment here too. Jamie points his arrow at the child, then lets it go. And at that moment, you hear the sound of children yelling. One shouts, "Get in here," and the other, "Hey!" It reminds me of this moment in 28 Days Later, when Jim is forced to kill a rage-infected kid. While it growls at him, you actually hear it shout, "I hate you." This was confirmed as an audio mixing error. They had people shouting all sorts of things for the sound of the rage-infected, but nothing coherent was supposed to come through. I doubt they made the same mistake twice, so I wonder if they included the sound in years to subtly humanize the infected. That's already done to an extent, because unlike every rage-infected we've ever met, this child runs away. It must be feeling something other than unending rage. Was it afraid? Or maybe unsure what to do without its parents around? Now, I don't think the rage-infected are actually speaking, but in this sequence, given the poem and the interspliced war footage, Boyle is already playing so much with the sound and visual design where not everything is literal, so I think they decided to drop in the sound of children, probably taken from some of what they filmed at the Village, to subconsciously raise the idea of human children while you're looking at the Slow-Lo Kid. I'm sure everyone knows by now too that this movie was largely shot on iPhones, though it's one of those things where the iPhones have so many attachments and lenses. It's like you shot it on an iPhone, yes, but there are some pretty big caveats. Like Days that was shot on small digital cameras, this was partly a logistical choice. They sometimes needed easily maneuverable cameras, but it also lends a similar found footage feel like the original. Then, of course, everyone has seen the picture of the sort of half-disc thing covered in iPhones, allowing for a budget version of bullet time. It gives the movie a unique, and let's be honest, cool look. If you want the artsy justification, it's similar to any time you do something unexpected with the camera. It draws the viewer's attention. As Boyle put it to IGN, as it's a horror movie, we use it for the violent scenes to emphasize their impact. For a moment, the audience is inside the scene, the action, rather than classically observing a picture. Spike's education for the day is not yet done. They continue further into the mainland. Inside a cottage, they scavenge but find little. Just a man, infected, hanging upside down, spitting up blood in a bag. He's been tied up and left for the infected as either punishment or a warning, or maybe both. The name Jimmy has been carved into his flesh. Our first hint that the boy we meet in the movie's opening, Jimmy, has become someone not to be trifled with, a post-apocalyptic leader of some kind. Spike wants to look away, but his father won't allow that, because there's a lesson here. While the man thrashes, Jamie orders his son to take his second kill. Spike hesitates until it thrashes so much it falls from the ceiling. Then finally, he sends an arrow through its skull. The lesson? At first, Jamie tells him there are strange people on the mainland, roaming. That's why our home is so precious. Spike asks if that's the lesson, and Jamie says no. Then, as if in answer, he tells Spike, kill it. The more you kill, the easier it gets. This is an interesting change from Garland's script. On the page, there are a couple of differences. They don't find a body in a cottage, they find it hanging from a tree. And Spike doesn't have to kill the man because in the script, he's already dead. But Jamie still uses it for a lesson, telling Spike, sometimes people do evil just because they can. There's strange folks out here, particularly the ones that roam. Is that the lesson? Spike asks. Jamie answers, the lesson is, however bad the infected are, people can be worse. In a way, that's the same answer he gives in the filmed version. The more you kill, the easier it gets. But the filmed version implicates him a bit more. He isn't Jimmy, he doesn't torture people and leave them for dead, but he has cultivated his ruthless side. He is a step in the direction of Jimmy, someone who romanticizes the kill.
Beautiful kill, Spike.
You feel good?
I think so.
You should.
I'm proud of you.
Soon, Jamie and Spike find the remains of a deer.
Intestines. I really like it.
Another small example of that reverence for violence. I weirdly like the smell of fresh intestines ripped out of an animal. There's also an interesting parallel here with 28 Days Later. Right after Jamie makes Spike kill the upside-down infected guy, we hear the hymn, Abide With Me, and cut to the other kids in the community learning in a traditional classroom setting. It happens at the 25-minute mark. At almost the exact same point in 28 Days Later, at the 24-minute mark, the same hymn is played. It happens when Jim finds his parents dead. It's meant to be mournful, not just for his parents, but on the commentary track. Boyle said they chose to use a couple of hymns in the movie, so the audience would think about
the history or the culture of the past in Britain, really, what had gone. We thought these haunting songs, these hymns would be a nice way of doing it.
In a way, both movies use the same hymn at the same time, but for opposite reasons. In Days, to mourn the loss of culture and history. In Years, to mourn their return. Specifically what Boyle and Garland see as the cherry-picked version of the past, romanticizing war and violence. The deer carcass, Jamie points out, is not the work of slow-lows. There must be fast ones around, and the head of that deer ripped out with its spinal cord means there's an alpha too. That's when Jamie decides they are going back. But across the field, they spot a pack and the alpha. Change of plans. Retreat into the forest. They run with that pack right behind them. What do you call a pack of the infected? The screenplay actually provides a word. In the opening pages, when describing Jimmy's infected father, the vicar, Garland writes, "As the infected vicar runs, the other infected start to follow. The collective noun of infected, a congregation." Jamie kills many of them. Spike, on the other hand, is scared, so his arrows mostly miss their targets. They keep running and killing back to a cottage where they hide. With the alpha waiting for them out there, they have no other choice but to wait themselves. They definitely won't fight it. Jamie's seen it take a dozen hits to take one of them down. As the sun goes down, they spot a fire in the distance. Spike asks what it is, and Jamie says he doesn't know, but it's obvious he's hiding something. I find it really easy to like the Jamie character. In part, that's Aaron Taylor Johnson's charm. In part, it's how badass he is in killing the rage infected, or congregations. And you expect him to be a militant father with no time for feelings. But he is sometimes warm and caring. That morning, he tries to give Spike all the bacon and lies, claiming he already had some, so his son wouldn't feel bad hogging it all. And once they've taken refuge in the cottage, Spike blames himself for missing so much. Jamie is quick to reassure him.
What are you talking about? This is not your fault. And you kept shooting. I've seen adults who kind of get an arrow on the bow, they're shaking so hard. Not you. Hey, Spike, you did well. Honestly.
Though it's a double-edged sword, because it also speaks to perhaps too much importance placed on the appearance of strength. That's a lot of the motivation for Spike being out here to begin with.
Can't go back there, Dad.
Why?
Everyone will think I'm soft.
Oh, they will.
We also have to talk about the alphas. They are terrifying, especially in silhouette, where you see just how big they are in comparison to normal infected. And after building up Jamie so much, to see him rattled by one tells you everything you need to know about them. That night, Spike has a dream of his mother drowning while his father skips rocks. Nightmares are a 28 franchise staple since Jim's Nightmare in Days, when he found himself alone, abandoned by his new friends. To me, Spike's dream represents his twofold fear. One, that his mother is not just unwell, but dying. And two, that his father doesn't seem to care. That's why instead of saving his mom in the nightmare, he's not even paying attention to her, just skipping rocks on the water. The nightmare ends when a stampede of deer finishes the job that 28 years of wear and tear started. The cottage collapses. Jamie and Spike are forced to run out into the open where the alpha awaits. It isn't low tide, but it'll have to be low enough. They run across the causeway, and the alpha follows close behind. It closes in, until finally, arrows from the watchtower. Jamie and Spike get on the right side of that gate and celebrate. And that may be one of my favorite sequences ever. First off, the whole idea of the causeway is awesome. It makes for a great visual, having the characters march across water to the mainland. It builds in a ticking time bomb. If we don't get back during low tide, we're stuck. And now when Jamie and Spike are forced to run before low tide, it means they're trudging through water. They're slow. As they make their way across, it's so tense, and there's a moment of relief, because they get pretty far on the causeway, and you figure, surely they've gotten far enough. Until you hear the thing and see it running. The scene is beautiful. It's a night shot, and with no light pollution, the night sky looks otherworldly. Because it's dark, it should be hard to keep track of where they are, but the splashing water makes it clear. And you can clearly see the bigger splash will overtake the smaller one. And they have no choice but to run in a straight line in this wide open space with nowhere to hide. A masterclass in suspense combined with incredible visual composition. Back in the village, Jamie has the time of his life telling everyone how brave his son was and all the killing he did. But it's all lies, or at best exaggeration. It doesn't sit well with Spike. And it doesn't sit well with him when he sees his father outside with Rosie. Why is he with someone who isn't Spike's mother? Does he not love her anymore? Does he not care that she's sick? Has he even tried to make her better? Or is he just waiting for her to die? While Jamie parties, Spike heads home where he finds Sam, Jamie's friend who helps out at home. Sam lets slip something he shouldn't. That fire they saw is likely the work of Dr. Ian Kelson. Spike can't believe it. Another lie. His dad said all the doctors were dead. That's why they don't know what's wrong with Mom. The next morning, Spike confronts him about it, and Jamie admits the truth. Yes, there is a Dr. Kelson, and that was his fire, but he's no good now because he's gone insane. Jamie knows because he saw it firsthand. Him and a group were foraging years ago, before Spike was born, and they saw Dr. Kelson with hundreds of corpses arranged in neat rows on the ground, and a big fire in the middle where he was burning them. When Kelson spotted the group, he casually waved for them to come down and join him, as though he weren't doing something so strange and grotesque. Jamie and his group ran away, and in 15 years, never looked back. Then Spike confronts Jamie about Isla, his mother. Does he want her to die so he can be with Rosie? Jamie tells the boy to watch his mouth, and when he doesn't, Jamie hits him. That's when Spike finally tells him to leave. Spike pulls out a knife and tells his father to get away from them. I feel so conflicted about this. On one hand, Jamie's story feels so dumb. If I put myself in Jamie's shoes, living in a world ravaged by infection, and I find out a doctor is methodically burning bodies, my first thought would be, this probably has something to do with stopping the spread. I definitely wouldn't be like, oh my God, he's crazy, run, and then never go back. Especially when a doctor would be incredibly useful to your community. Look, Jamie has obviously seen some stuff. He was pretty unfazed when he found the infected guy hanging upside down, carved with the name Jimmy. So he's definitely seen brutality like it before, at the hands of strange people on the mainland. That probably impacted the way he saw Kelson. But in 15 years, to never send a scout or do any kind of observation to see if maybe that doctor could be of use, I have a really hard time buying it. On the other hand, thematically, it does accomplish something. Jamie represents the regressive approach, cherry-picking, romanticizing the past. That's the approach which blinds you. It causes ignorance and close-mindedness. So Jamie can't see Kelson as anything other than a lunatic, just like he can't see the infected as anything other than monsters, versus Kelson's more compassionate view, which we'll get to know later. I also enjoy the unconventional path the movie takes. If you want Spike on his own for an apocalyptic coming-of-age story, the easy choice would be to kill the father. Instead, they kill the image of the father. That's more interesting and has the potential to make for a very interesting confrontation in the second or third movie once Spike has grown some more. This is when the movie effectively enters another chapter. The first was about Spike and his father, the next, Spike and his mother. He decides to take her across the causeway himself and bring her to Dr. Kelson. He lights a fire as a distraction, so the watchtower is briefly abandoned, and in that brief window, he leaves with his mother. At night, they take shelter. Spike promises to keep watch, but he is still a kid. Kids get sleepy. Even when a Slolo mistakes his shoelace for a worm, doesn't wake him up. Even when that Slolo spits out the shoelace and notices Spike's warm body, it doesn't wake him up. But in the morning, he's okay, and the Slolo is dead. What happened? His mother saw it and killed it, violently smashing in its head. She just doesn't remember. Part of whatever ailment has been affecting her mind. This is her Jim moment, highlighting the rage and violence inside all of us. Even this motherly figure who is sick and mostly unable to take care of herself. The instinct, the rage is still there, even when she herself isn't entirely conscious. The screenplay makes it even more explicit. Cut to Isla's face. We can see the same madness that we see in the faces of the infected, teeth bared and gritted, eyes wide, as if in horror at herself. She also talks to Spike about the way her father was with her.
Is your dad silly?
Dad?
Yeah. Silly with you, jokey. Your granddad was so silly.
Is Jamie ever like that?
Is your dad like that? You know, when it's just the two of you?
No.
I think Jamie has a potential defamation suit on his hands with how much this movie constantly badmouths him. Yes, this is another example of turning him into the personification of aggression. Not only does he cherry pick the past, but also fatherhood, only showing Spike his tougher, militant side. That might be frustrating to hear because you could easily say, lay off. They're in a gosh darn apocalypse. Maybe it's good to be a little tough. And I think that's fair, but even still, it's part of highlighting the cost of that attitude. Even if it's a necessary price to pay, there is still a price worth recognizing. Becoming a bloodthirsty warrior isn't free. If you were to apply some of these ideas to the real world, I think Garland and Boyle would like us to recognize where we're too focused on the past. And if we see ourselves in 28 years later, we can ask, should we as a society live as if we're in a rage apocalypse? If circumstance has pushed Jamie, Isla, and Spike's community into the past, it helps us recognize the luxury of the future. In our world, we get to be progressive if we want. We don't have to be regressive, even if, for Jamie, that's sometimes the right choice. The next day, they continue on their journey. Nearby, some Swedish soldiers have a problem. While patrolling the east coast of Scotland, they hit something and their boat sank. A few of them found a life raft, and the wind blew them to shore. Now they're fighting for their lives. The guns help, but the rage-infected are fast, and all it takes is one bite for soldiers to join their ranks. And then there are the Alphas. Before long, most of the soldiers are dead. Elsewhere, some infected bathe themselves in water. I think they're kind of splashing around, clearly another indication of at least animalistic intelligence, enough to justify how they've survived as a species these last 28 years. Along the same lines, one of those infected is pregnant. In some fields, Isla and Spike walk, a walk she enjoys despite, or maybe thanks to her confusion. She mistakes Spike for her father, and the walk becomes a nostalgia trip, until her nose bleeds and she returns to lucidity, in time to watch her son put down an emaciated, infected Jim. No, that wasn't really Jim, but when the trailers came out, a lot of people thought this guy was Jim. When more infected arrive, this time fast ones, Spike and his mom run. They get inside a petrol station where they can hardly breathe, thanks to a cloud of benzene vaporized after decades of neglect. The infected come in after them. They're only saved when the sole surviving Swedish soldier fires into the gas cloud. The resulting explosion kills the infected, while Spike and Isla hit the deck. Similar to 28 days later, when Mark and Selena blow up a gas station, but survive along with Jim by hiding in the wall space between windows. Outside, the soldier introduces himself as Eric. He makes for a fun character as a fish out of water who feels like he came from the future to a place trapped in a pre-technological past. He has to explain where a delivery driver is.
You know, people order stuff online. But you don't know what online is.
He has to explain what a smartphone is.
Take a look at that. It's my fiance. Or ex, I guess.
What's wrong with that face?
These moments make for nice levity after a lot of tension, and before things are about to take a dramatic and somber tone. My favorite moment? Eric carries Isla for a while until...
Mom?
She can walk?
Eric is a fun character, but also touches on another theme: how easy it is for the world to keep turning, ignoring a tragedy going on somewhere else. Days touches on this when we realize they're quarantined. It takes a second because Jim is out of it, so the guy ranting and raving in the background is drowned out.
Smithers says women and seamen don't mix.
But if you turn on the subtitles, you actually see he's quoting Simpsons. Here's what he says. Smithers says, women and seamen don't mix. And Mr. Burns says, we all know what you think, Smithers. And that was my favorite joke in The Simpsons. That's what they're doing a few hundred miles away, across the channel, across the Atlantic. Eating dinner and watching the
fucking Simpsons.
I think women and seamen don't mix.
We knew what you think.
28 years later, we meet Eric with a smartphone and make the idea real. As they continue on, they hear screaming. Isla follows it to an old train car where she finds that pregnant, infected woman in the midst of giving birth. She's suffering, so Isla offers her hands. The infected woman takes them. For a moment, the two women, both sick in different ways, hold each other's hands. They hold hands until the baby is born. This moment is an answer to a couple of earlier ones. Jim raging out on the soldiers in 28 Days Later. Isla raging out on the slow-lo in this movie. Those moments showed us that though it's not our 24/7 operating system, there is rage inside us. This moment shows that while rage is the infected's 24/7 operating system, there is humanity in them. Through the magic of the placenta and its ability to filter out pathogens and toxins, the baby is born without infection. But wait, what about the young infected we see earlier in the movie? My guess is that when these babies are born, they eventually do get the infection through breastfeeding, for instance. The baby is born. Isla asks Spike to cut the umbilical cord. They clean it off with water, and soon the mother returns to her state of rage. But before she can attack, Eric puts her down. Then he demands Isla leave the baby.
It's a baby! It's a fucking zombie baby!
And there it is. This franchise's first use of the Z word.
Don't say that. What? That. The Z word. Don't say it.
It's funny, there's an interview where journalist Jake Hamilton asks Boyle and Garland if this is the first time in the franchise where they use the word zombie. And look how confused Garland gets.
Do they use the... I did. I'm not just... You could easily be right. I'm sure you are right. Where do they say it? Did somebody say it?
I assume he's confused because if you search, that word does not appear in his written screenplay, at least the one they've published, which you can purchase. So I'm guessing it was improvised on set. Boyle and Garland can't seem to remember when or how the line was decided. Then Garland goes on a tangent about how he does not object to the word, because although they aren't supernatural in this movie, clearly it's a movie in the zombie genre.
I always thought, yeah, it's a zombie movie. I mean, it's from that genre. It's in that lineage. It's aware of the George Romero stuff and all the other films. And it was just a twist on it.
Glad we can finally put that to rest, which is what Eric hopes to do to the baby. He demands Isla put it on the ground so he can shoot it. And that's when the alpha grabs him and rips his head off. He was likely drawn by the sound of his gunfire. Spike and Isla run. Like the Causeway chase, this one is extra tense, thanks to the doors between train cars slowing them down. Luckily, that also slows down the Alpha, whose large size is actually an impediment in the cramped carriages. Though you get the sense he's extra motivated to catch up, since the humans have stolen his progeny. He also pauses for a moment to lift the dead woman, then returns to his rage state. Seemingly enraged, they've killed someone he might recognize as a mate. In terms of intelligence, he doesn't crash through the train doors. We actually see him slide them open. He also stops chasing them once he realizes he's better off waiting for them to get off the train, where out in the open he'll once again have a speed advantage. They leap off the train, he chases them, and they're as good as dead, until Dr. Kelson hits the Alpha with a blow dart, a combination of morphine and xylazine. Crazy Dr. Kelson is orange from head to toe. He's covered himself in iodine to hopefully keep out the virus. While the Alpha stands in a daze, Kelson introduces him as Samson. That's what he calls the Alpha, who has lived in the area for 3 years. Why hasn't he just killed the Alpha? How stupid is he? It's called compassion. You who so love to point out, they aren't zombies, they're rage-infected humans. You of all people should understand. Yeah, they're humans, they're people. Kelson represents the alternative to Jamie's regressive view. He represents compassion. I'd argue that neither view is perfect. Both have their blind spots. Like how many non-infected have died by Samson's hands thanks to Kelson keeping him alive? The right answer, like so many things, is probably somewhere in between. Compassion balanced with pragmatic ruthlessness. Ray Fiennes plays this character so well. Compassion, wisdom, with a touch of awkwardness, expected after years of little to no social contact, like the little spark of joy when he introduces Spike to his bone temple.
What's that?
I've been waiting almost 13 years for someone to ask that question.
Dr. Kelson answers Spike's question with a question. Do you know the words memento mori, Latin for remember death? Remember, you must die. They cross the rope bridge, which helps keep the infected out, and he gives them a tour of his bone temple. That's what Jamie saw 15 years ago. He was burning bodies down to the bone so he could build a monument in their honor.
Infected and non-infected alike, because they are alike.
It really is awe-inspiring to see. A pile of bones and skulls is something you'd only expect in a horror movie, which I guess this is. But you don't expect it to be a beautiful monument, something your eyes are drawn to rather than repelled in disgust. It's especially intoxicating thanks to the lush green of uncontrolled nature around it. If you're like me and you watch a lot of horror movies, including a lot of zombie movies, you've seen a lot of people die. It gets to a point where you're totally desensitized to it. Actually, that's true of all kinds of movies. Garland points out in his interview with Script Apart, it's true of superhero movies. He talks about how every time a building falls, there are probably a lot of people dying. Man of Steel. Thinking about the island and 28 years later.
What has happened on this island is just an enormous amount of death. And who's looking at that? Who's looking at it fairly? So there's this character who is concerned with that thing.
This whole sequence is about bringing not just the movie to a standstill, but in a way, the whole genre. Let's take pause and reckon with death for a few minutes.
A sort of compassionate thing. And then, and this is going to sound a bit odd and probably pretentious, that's exactly true of any place. It's true of London and Britain and Europe and the world.
It's easy to get used to the noise of 24/7 news coverage on wars, atrocities, and any other sources of constant death. This sequence is an attempt, I think, to turn statistics back into tragedies, to remind us that a skull isn't just a Halloween decoration or horror movie prop.
Every skull is a set of thoughts. These sockets saw, and these jaws spoke and swallowed. This is a monument to them, a temple.
Kelson oozes compassion, even the way he reassures Spike before he even has a chance to feel bad for knocking over some of the skulls.
Don't worry, no, it's not precious in that way.
Dr. Kelson melts off the remains of Eric's flesh, and they find him a spot in the temple. That night, he assesses Isla. He can't know for certain, but he's certain enough. She has cancer. It's in her brain. Either it started there or spread there from her body. In any case, there will be no surviving it. Isla had a feeling this was the case. She admits she should have told Spike, but she was too scared. She needed someone else to tell him, but no one did. Can we lay off Jamie for 2 minutes? Spike doesn't want to believe it. Can they not find her medicine? Something? No, nothing can cure her. She will die soon. Until then, it hurts, and her mind is going. She'd rather go a better way. Kelson and Isla know Spike won't accept it, at least not yet, so he hits him with one of the blow darts. As Spike is subdued, Kelson reminds him what memento mori means. We all must die. And it's true, but there are better ways than others. The best is a peaceful one, where we leave each other in love.
Memento amoris. Remember, you must love.
Then Kelson and Isla walk off. Soon he returns with her clean skull in his hand. Come sunrise, Spike climbs to the top of the bone tower and finds his mother the perfect resting place, a perch from where she can watch the rising sun. How can anyone not like this movie? It obviously subverts expectations in a couple of ways. Instead of rising action in the third act, things slow way down. And instead of a Kurtz-like figure from Heart of Darkness or its film adaptation Apocalypse Now, Spike finds his inverse. Subverting expectations is obviously not a guarantee of quality, but when it's in service of great storytelling, then I'd say it's more often than not a step in the direction of something special. We watch movies to feel something, and it's easy to get burnt out on watching the same thing over and over. So if you can achieve the element of surprise in a way that's organic to the story, I'll always appreciate that. That's partly why 28 years later for me easily rivals 28 days later. Quick note, I'm glad they kept Isla's death off screen. Garland's screenplay actually had us watch Kelson behead her with a machete. Exterior, the Bone Temple, night. Isla. She is standing in the Bone Temple, chin raised, looking up at the stars, smiling slightly. Half a beat later, she is decapitated. She drops, revealing Dr. Kelson behind her with a machete. Alright, enough of this lame, sentimental crap. Do you hear the thumping of those footsteps? The Alpha is on his way. Spike and Kelson hide underground until Samson puts his fist through the hatch. He grabs Kelson until Spike sticks him with a needle and subdues him again. Kelson suggests that perhaps it's time for Spike and the baby to go home. As long as the baby is there, the Alpha will keep coming back to try and get it. And I'm not sure how long Kelson can defend himself on compassion alone, plus a little morphine and xylazine. Spike journeys off with the baby in a basket and heads across the causeway. He leaves that baby at the gate, along with a note to his father. Dad, I'm okay. You don't need to look for me. I'll come back when I'm ready. I want to keep walking until I can't see the sea. We found Dr. Kelson. He's not insane. He's a kind man. The baby's from an infected, but she's not. She's okay. Please be kind to her. Her name is Isla. There's an edit here that's a little strange. It says 28 days later to tell us Spike survives on his own outside the walls for about a month. We see him catching and cooking fish. The weird thing is the 28 days later card comes up before he drops the baby off, when of course there's no way the baby could survive a month without milk or a substitute. So really, I think he drops the baby off, then 28 days pass. And actually, that's how it's presented in the screenplay. And although the edit is a bit strange in the movie, I think what we're meant to interpret is that after the title card, what we're seeing is a montage of what happens over the course of 28 days, rather than a clean time skip. Anyway, in that note to his father, Spike is pretty dismissive. He certainly did a lot of growing up in the movie, but I think he's overestimated just how grown up he is, and I think he'll be in for a rude awakening in the next movie. I think he won't get to be so picky over which dad he gets. He'll be crying for Jamie. When Jamie gets the note, he sprints out the gate screaming for Spike, but it's high tide, so he can't get very far. After 28 days, Spike is followed. He can hear the sound of people around him moving quickly and making strange noises. They are not the sounds of the infected, but the infected are there too. Spike kills who he can until he's cornered. That's when they step in to save him. The Jimmies. The boy from the opening, now grown up and leading some sort of roaming gang. Each member wears a different colored tracksuit, matching the colors of the Teletubbies. They easily slaughter the coming infected, and they do it with style. Finally, time for introductions.
Hello, my name's Jimmy.
He shakes the boy's hand.
That's me pals.
The upside down cross is a really clever way to remind you who this character is if you don't remember. It has been almost 2 hours since you met him, but you're likely to remember that cross thanks to the way it was highlighted early on. Jack O'Connell, by the way, is perfect casting. In this and in Sinners, he is so good at the charismatic menace. And he's a great preview of what's to come. In an interview with IndieWire, Boyle said that where 28 years later is about the nature of family, its sequel, that heavily focuses on the Jimmies, is about the nature of evil. More on that when we get to Bone Temple shortly. As the conclusion to Spike's story in this movie, though, I think the Jimmies represent a few things. Primarily, they are the next stage in his growing up. He learned a few lessons in this movie about death and about the flaws in people. Both his parents lied to him. His mother because she was scared and didn't know how to tell her son she's probably dying. His dad lied, I think out of guilt. He obviously didn't want his son to know about the affair and didn't want him to know about the doctor because that would make it obvious he had not explored every possible avenue to help Isla. There was also an element of fear. He feared what he didn't understand when he saw Kelson preparing to build his bone temple 15 years ago. But flaws in people trying their best are one thing. Evil is something else. We don't know much about the Jimmies yet, but we saw their handiwork, carving up a man and leaving him for the infected. We see some graffiti. Someone has written, "Behold, he is coming with clouds," and the gang has added Jimmy to that sentence, painting him as an almost cult-like figure. When the Jimmies arrive, they are a chaotic presence, with gratuitous acrobatics and over-the-top methods for dispatching the infected. That is uncomfortable in this apocalyptic landscape, where Spike has learned to survive with more traditional, quiet tactics, and where noise draws the infected. One thing Spike has virtually no exposure to is pop culture. He didn't even know what a frisbee was earlier in the movie, so a gang shaping themselves after pop culture from before the rage virus hit makes them an even stranger presence to Spike. In addition to the Teletubbies, Jimmy primarily bases his look off Jimmy Savile, a huge figure in British pop culture history. Savile hosted BBC's Top of the Pops in the 60s, a weekly music show, and Jim'll Fix It from the 70s into the 90s, where he granted wishes for kids who wrote in. He died in 2011, and the following year, investigations revealed that his celebrity status covered up the truth, that he was a monster, a predator and abuser with hundreds of victims, including children. Jimmy, and 28 years later, adopting Savile's look is one more example of cherry-picking the past. In their interview with Business Insider, speaking on the topic, Boyle said, "It's all kind of twisting in this partial remembrance, clinging on to things, and then recreating them as an image for followers." In the world of 28 years later, that cherry-picking might not be entirely intentional, as the rage virus would have hit in the early 2000s, likely preventing Savile's full story from coming out as it did for us in 2012. Finally, there's an interesting comparison to be drawn between Spike and Jimmy. Both had their own traumatic upbringings. Jimmy lost his family to the infected, Spike lost his mother to cancer, and his father, though still alive, has in a way forsaken him, as Jimmy's father did him. However, it seems like Spike is on a better path, in part thanks to the wisdom and mentorship of Dr. Kelson. Perhaps that's what Jimmy lacked that led him to become who he is now. Speaking of, let's talk about Bone Temple. 28 years later, the Bone Temple is incredible. Easily the greatest fourth entry in a series of all time. Admittedly, it's a small pool, but one that does include Mad Max Fury Road. And now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it's a close call, but it's a great movie, is my point. Bone Temple is exhilarating, stomach-turning, outright disturbing, at the same time, strangely humorous, and incredibly heartwarming. And it has a dance number set to Iron Maiden. It's a difficult balancing act, especially combining hope with the absolute darkness and depravity this film explores. That's something 28 Days Later accomplished too, but you could argue Bone Temple goes even further. In this go-around, the extremes are personified by two characters, Dr. Ian Kelson and Sir Lord Jimmy Crystal. By taking these ideas, hope and evil, and crystallizing them in such stark contrast, the movie examines them more viscerally and smashes them together to glorious results. In all the insanity, just like most of its predecessors, it has something to say. This video is going to explore that, the deeper meaning and themes of the Bone Temple. It was directed by Nia DaCosta, handling the middle chapter of this intended trilogy, though it was written by Alex Garland, who wrote 28 Days Later, 28 Years Later, and will write the final entry in the Years trilogy, so he provides a consistent voice throughout. And hopefully that third movie actually happens, that's sadly starting to look questionable. At the start of the writing process for this trilogy, Days and Years director Danny Boyle asked Garland to tell him the nature of each film. Quote, he said the first film is about the nature of family. The second film is about the nature of evil. So, evil. You don't have to look far to find it in this movie. Spoilers ahead, by the way. It starts with Jimmy forcing a 12-year-old to fight to the death. Later, he leads his fingers, what he calls his followers, in skinning innocent people alive for the crime of no crime at all. The Jimmy simply found them, and Crystal believes it is his duty to serve pain and suffering in the name of his father, Satan. There are also the infected. That doesn't require much explanation, but just in case, Kelson says he's seen them attack children, even babies. I can already hear the comments. That is tragic and horrible, but we can't call it evil because the infected have no agency. Calling them evil is like calling a hurricane or some other natural disaster evil. You can if you'd like, but it gets away from how we usually conceptualize evil in the context of morality. It's typically a judgment on the choices we make. So in the absence of choice, it's hard to discuss evil. If you want to find the real evil in this movie, then, we have to find the ones who have the most choice available to them, and yet still commit evil acts. Let's start with those who have the least freedom, the infected. Late in the movie, Dr. Kelson figures out their nature. The symptoms aren't purely physical. There's a psychosis involved too. It makes the infected see something that isn't there. Monsters. The movie actually tips its hat early on. Less than 10 minutes in, the infected alpha, Samson, approaches an uninfected man. We're given a rare glimpse from Samson's point of view, seeing what he sees. The ordinary man appears to him like a monster. Dark eyes with red underneath them, inhumanly pale, rotting skin, and bloody teeth. The man appears as a ghoul, growling at him. So Samson does the only natural thing and rips his head off. It isn't exactly choice the way we have it, but Samson is operating on instinct the way people do. When faced with a threat, we pick between fight, flight, or freeze. And if the threat is real, depending on the context, most would consider you within your right to select fight, as Samson does here. The problem is that the threat is real to Samson, but we know it isn't real. This man is no threat. The children maimed and killed by the infected are no threat. But to Samson, they are. That is what his eyes tell him. Can we call that evil? Or instead, should we call it illness? Is that the word we should use if a person's actions are morally logical, but based on a faulty premise or faulty sensory data? Now let's talk about Jimmy Crystal. Director Nia DaCosta definitely wants us to draw a comparison between him and the infected because she draws one visually. In 28 Days Later, you might recall a stylistic choice Danny Boyle made to use a lower shutter angle when filming the infected. That's how he achieved that choppy staccato look, which provides an intense hyper-real feeling, similar to the effect Spielberg used in Saving Private Ryan. DaCosta brings that effect back in The Bone Temple, but doesn't just use it for the infected. She also uses it for the Jimmies, drawing a direct visual connection between them. There's another area where she draws a connection. Just like Samson, Jimmy also sees things that aren't there. When he's crucified on the upside-down cross and Samson approaches, we see through Jimmy's eyes. And what Jimmy sees is literal Satan. He sees Samson with red skin, black eyes, and horns, helped by the fact that Samson is covered in blood at this point. Earlier, Jimmy tells Dr. Ian Kelson that his father is Old Nick, a nickname for Satan, and that he constantly hears his voice in his head. When he initially approached Kelson, he even thought Kelson might be his father. After all, the iodine makes his skin look strange, and he's surrounded by bones. It seems Jimmy really believed it, that Kelson might be his father, the devil. There's sadness in the moment when he realizes the man is just that, a man. We see Jimmy's loneliness and disappointment when he doesn't find his father. And we see that, like the infected, Jimmy Crystal sees and hears things that are not there. Voices in his head, and in at least one case, the devil himself. It started 28 years ago. We saw in the opening to 28 years later, child Jimmy is watching the Teletubbies when everyone around him is slaughtered, including his mother and sisters. He runs to the church for help, but his father, the vicar, offers none. Instead, he welcomes the infected. He becomes one of them, while Jimmy can only ask, why?
Father, why have you forsaken me?
Jack O'Connell, who plays Jimmy, described it like this in his interview with Mashable.
It is a deep-seated trauma based on seeing his family get mauled to death in front of his very eyes. Not only that, his dad being the sort of Pied Piper.
Dr. Kelson understands the infection as a biological infection. Jimmy sees it as demonic. And why would his dad play the Pied Piper for demons? The child Jimmy could only make sense of it by understanding that his father, the vicar, was actually Old Nick, Satan himself. But it took root in his mind as more than a flawed belief. It was a trauma that manifested in a very real way. Just like the rage infection does to the infected, it causes genuine hallucinations. Just like Samson, Jimmy has faulty sensory data. What he considers sinful, he believes is his duty. He must hurt people in order to appease his father. Is that evil, or is it illness? Maybe it's both. You could say it's evil, but just so happens to be evil with an explanation. We can point to the traumatic event which caused it, and the hallucinations that perpetuate it, but those are just that. Explanations, not excuses or by any stretch justifications. And even on that front, Jimmy is not always following the voice in his head, that faulty sensory data. Sometimes, I'd imagine quite often, he lies to manipulate his followers. Just one example, when they spy on Kelson and they ask if he's really Old Nick, Jimmy says yes, while he himself is unsure. That points to real freedom, even within his possible psychosis. The fact that he makes his followers dress like him and call themselves Jimmy points to narcissism, and it all points to the idea. Maybe he just likes hurting people, while the hallucinations give him a convenient excuse. The rage virus, Jimmy's trauma, and possibly untreated psychosis. These things cloud the conversation about evil. But Jimmy's fingers, his followers, are a cleaner example. We have no reason to believe their minds are disconnected from reality, at least not in a treatable clinical sense. So what's their excuse? They commit atrocities at their leader's request. Why? They live in a world overrun by demons. It isn't hard to see how Jimmy convinced them the devil is in charge. Then he just needs them to cross one more bridge. The idea that he is that devil's son and Messiah, and that he speaks on the devil's behalf. Once they buy into all that, the morally wrong becomes right. It becomes what Jimmy Crystal calls charity. More evil with an explanation. Jimmy's fingers do terrible things because they believe it's right because their leader told them so, which is insane. The man wanders post-apocalyptic Britain wearing a tracksuit and talking about Teletubbies. At a glance, everyone knows that is not a man to be followed. Of course, look at history, look at today. I'm sure you can pick out political leaders where you'd say exactly the same thing. Who could possibly follow them? And don't they see the horrible things being done in their name? So what attracts people to a cult of personality like Jimmy Crystal? Dr. Ian Kelson answers that question in The Bone Temple. Jimmy asks him what it was like growing up in a world pre-rage. Surprisingly, Kelson has forgotten much of it, but he says, I do remember there was a sense of certainty. The world had an order, a way about it. There were dramas and upheavals inevitably, but the foundations, they seemed unshakable. This is where Garland and DaCosta explicitly tell us what has been lost in a world of rage, and what has created an environment where people are willing to follow a Jimmy Crystal. It's when people lose that sense of certainty, when people fear the foundations of their country, for example, are threatened. That's when they turn to a leader who promises salvation, a leader who often, instead of looking forward, looks backwards. That is something Boyle and Garland already began exploring in the first 28 years later. The most blatant example being the audio-visual poetry of Spike on his first hunt. A more than century-old recording of the poem Boots accompanies a mix of present-day footage intercut with clips from 1944's Henry V, showing medieval war, along with archival footage of British soldiers marching in World War II, and even clips from 28 weeks later. In my 28 years later review, I already discussed how Garland and Boyle wanted to explore how the past is twisted and romanticized. In part, they explore this through Jamie and the Holy Island Commune's regressive, militant worldview. The movie is critical of Jamie's view of the world while recognizing its utility. That militant attitude toward the infected has kept them safe as a community. At the same time, reverence for the hunt leads to decisions like bringing a 12-year-old onto an island filled with monsters. It leads to close-mindedness that does not allow Jamie to see Dr. Kelson as anything other than insane, which leads to Spike running off with Isla, ultimately leading him into Jimmy Crystal's crosshairs. Holy Island's militant, regressive view misses the truth that the infected are still human, something proven in the Bone Temple when Samson's humanity returns to the surface. That is something enabled by Dr. Kelson's more progressive view, a cure, something that would enable Britain to take a major step toward reclaiming society, rather than living in isolated communities clinging to the past on an island overrun by rage. In that script-apart interview recorded before the Bone Temple's release, Garland previewed the upcoming movie, discussing how Jack O'Connell's character Jimmy represents the misremembered past.
In the very end of this film, you encounter Jack O'Connell's the sort of micro family, who are a kind of mash of misremembered things, and that becomes the sort of the launch pad for Nia DaCosta's second film.
Jimmy Crystal, in so many ways, embodies a cherry-picked past. First, there's the source of his costume. We already talked about the real-world figure his look is borrowed from. In her interview with Mashable, DaCosta talks more about how Crystal represents the past and misremembers it.
I mean, Jimmy corrupts everything. I mean, even with the Teletubbies, he calls them the Teletubbies, because it's also about how he remembers a thing. Like his entire dogma is built around this misremembered death of his father. Oh yeah, my dad is Satan because he thinks that's what he saw when he was 8 or however old he was.
Between the Bone Temple and its predecessor, DaCosta, Boyle, and Garland wave a big red flag that says, look out for leaders who obsess with the past rather than look to the future, despite how seductive that may feel. Jimmy, with his stories of teletummies and ninja-like ability to dispatch the infected. Jamie, with his action hero bravado and charm. One is way worse than the other, but both borrow from the same well and offer answers in a broken world where people desperately need them. So what does the Bone Temple say about evil? It can stem from delusion or a corrupted view of the world. That could be literal in the sense of suffering a psychosis, seeing demons in place of a biological virus, or it could be ideology. When the things that Kelson eulogizes are gone, certainty, order, and unshakable foundations, people are left grasping for comfort. That is when they are vulnerable to dangerous ideologies, often rooted in some romanticized version of the past. See the Holy Island Commune. But even more dangerous than that, the thing explored more in the Bone Temple than its predecessor, ideologies that erase the individual. When you are no longer a person, but a finger, and when your name is replaced by some variation of Jimmy, your cult leader. In a less exaggerated sense, that would refer to groups where individual thought and questions are discouraged in place of dogma. Dogma that often raises one person above all who must be obeyed. There, you risk a total loss of identity, and it becomes easier to ignore your innate sense of right and wrong. It becomes easier to just follow orders. Leader says to skin them alive because it's what Lord Satan wants. His will be done. It would all be pretty morose if not for Dr. Ian Kelson, who offers a solution to it all, something explored more in the last 28 years later, then reiterated in the Bone Temple. In my 28 years later review, we discussed Kelson's focus on death, memorializing all people, infected and uninfected alike, recognizing the value of life, dragging statistics back into the realm of tragedy. 28 years later introduces Kelson's ideas, mostly unchallenged. Then its sequel, The Bone Temple, smashes them against, in a lot of ways, his opposite, Jimmy, where Kelson dedicates himself to the ultimate act of love, building a monument to so many lives lost. Jimmy chooses rage. The rage virus has turned humanity into a mass of violence where it's hard to tell one person from another, yet Kelson dedicates himself to finding the individual in all that mess, excavating Samson's humanity from beneath the rage. Jimmy does the opposite, burying the individual inside a tracksuit, a wig, and assumed name, turning his followers into Jimmys, copies of himself. For that, Jimmy is punished, crucified on an upside-down cross, and Kelson is rewarded. Yes, he dies too, but only after completing his decades-in-the-making project, that temple. He even finds a cure for the rage virus first, and gets to hear thank you from Samson. In years, he told Spike there are many kinds of death, and some are better than others. The best are peaceful, where we leave each other in love. His death was not peaceful, with Jimmy screaming and crying next to him, but as though he was waiting for that peace to come, he holds on until Samson arrives. Once Samson says thank you, it's only then Kelson allows himself to pass. He gets the death he described to Spike.
Where we leave each other in love.
After spending a movie dancing with Samson and calling him friend, I think it's fair to say there was a sort of love between them. Like every Garland scripted 28 movie that came before, it's ultimately hopeful. Not only do we see an infected cured for the first time, or at least treated, I think it's fair to say there's a question of whether the effects of Kelson's cocktail are permanent or not. Hopefully his handwriting is legible, and hopefully Selena, who was a chemist, is still alive. Jury is out, because where was she in that ending? But as I said, it's a hopeful ending regardless. Samson treated, and if that wasn't enough of a visceral, hopeful jolt, the movie gives us what we all wanted, the return of Cillian Murphy, where he's given the choice so many are given in quarantine Britain. People need help. Do I put myself in danger to help them? Of course he will. DaCosta, in various interviews, has summed up Kelson's worldview. Here's one example from her appearance on Real Rejects.
He's a humanist, and he's basically like, you know, there is no God, there is no devil, but there is us. He says it's just us, and for him that's like beautiful. He's like, we get to determine how we live our lives and what meaning we make out of our lives.
This movie's point of view is that there is no devil or elemental evil creeping beneath humanity, corrupting our actions. That is something highlighted by Kelson's performance. My theater's jaws were on the floor during his Iron Maiden dance number, but there was also laughter. Not laughter at the movie like it's overstepped, but laughter at the absurdity and insanity of it all. When Kelson is revealed as an ordinary man, the spell that had already cracked is entirely broken for Jimmy Inc., who turns out to have a real name, Kelly. She finally and formally turns on Jimmy Crystal, taking the honors of nailing him to a cross. It makes for a grand finale, and on a thematic level, ties into the idea that there is no literal devil behind the curtain. There are just people like Jimmy Crystal doling out evil for one reason or another, and people following them for one reason or another. Like I said earlier, I don't think these are particularly groundbreaking ideas, but Kelson's focus on human value and dignity is certainly a theme worth reinforcing through art, and rarely is it so powerfully reinforced than in the context of a grounded, stomach-churning, and horrific reality like 28 Days Later or 28 Years Later. But that is the perfect place to do it, because our eyes and minds are drawn by contrast, when one thing is not like the other. And what better contrast to the ultimate good than Sir Lord Jimmy Crystal and his fingers. Thank you for watching this video, and as they say, memento spectare, remember you must watch.